Hello, welcome everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to today's webinar entitled Coalition Building to Advance Decarceral Legislation, Lessons from New Jersey and Illinois. I'm Ashley Jackson. I'm an assistant professor at the School of Social Work at Rutgers University. And myself, along with Dr. Matt Epperson, who's an associate professor at the University of Chicago Crown Family School of Social Work Policy and Practice. We're both really excited today to lead today's webinar with a dynamic group of policy advocates, community-based leaders, and organizers. Dr. Epperson and myself are two co-leads of the Promote Smart Decarceration Grand Challenge of Social Work. PSD for short was launched in 2015, and really our goal of the PSD was to highlight ways that different jurisdictions reduce reliance on the carceral system, redress existing disparities, economic, racial, gender, and so forth in the criminal legal system, and really how you maximize safety and well-being outside of the purview of the carceral system. Over the years, we recognized decarceration is just not enough, right? We really need to continue to be reducing our reliance on the carceral system, ultimately to end at abolition. And so PSD we continue to try and identify opportunities to highlight and uplift examples of really strong and inspiring alternatives that better respond to community needs outside the formal criminal legal system. And so today our webinar uplifts two key pieces of legislation that we really think address economic and structural inequality. One is the Pretrial Fairness Act of Illinois, which ended money bail. And the second one is the Seabrooks Washington Community-Led Crisis Response Act in New Jersey, which appropriated $12 million to various different counties in New Jersey to establish a crisis response program to better serve individuals in mental distress. And that was after the murder of two individuals, one in Jersey City and one in Paterson, New Jersey, that were going through a mental health crisis and unfortunately lost their life to police violence. And so these two examples are really important, and we're so excited to welcome our panelists. But I'll turn it over to Dr. Matt Epperson to introduce our wonderful crew of panelists.
Great. Thank you, Ashley. Hi, everyone. So glad you're here. And I want to give a special thanks to the panelists who are very busy and taking time out of the important work that they do to share these lessons with us. I think Ashley summed this up perfectly. I don't think there's much to add other than we really are hoping, like through these tangible examples, that folks who are in attendance, whether you're a practicing social worker or from some other field or a researcher or an advocate or a person directly impacted by these systems, that you might be inspired by some ways to get involved in these kinds of coalition building to make tangible policy change. So I will briefly introduce each speaker, and you'll hear more about them and their roles as they start to respond to some of the questions. So from Illinois, we have Daryl Brown, who is the Director of Social Justice at Trinity United Church of Christ. In New Jersey, we have Dr. Lisa Chowdhury, who is with Reimagining Justice and the Paterson Healing Collective. Also from New Jersey, we have Sarah Fajardo, who is the Policy Director of the American Civil Liberties Union of New Jersey. From Illinois, we have Charlene Grace, who is a Senior Policy Advisor with the Law Office of the Cook County Public Defender. And then rounding out our panel, we have Raquel Romans Henry, who is the Policy Director for Salvation and Social Justice, which is in New Jersey. So first, we're just going to ask two panelists to share an overview of these pieces of legislation. So first, we'll come to you, Charlene. Can you give us an overview for those that aren't familiar with the Pretrial Fairness Act and some of the major components of that piece of legislation?
Yeah. Thanks everybody for having me. I'm really excited about this conversation. So it's already been said in the introduction to the panel, but the sort of banner reform, the thing that everybody knows about, which makes sense as the headline, is that Illinois became the first state in the country to completely eliminate money bail or money bond. We use that interchangeably, so I bet Daryl and I will do that in this webinar. But really the Pretrial Fairness Act, which was the law passed in January 2021 that went into effect September of 2023, what it did in addition to eliminating money bond was completely restructure and redesign the pretrial system in Illinois, and particularly to ensure that most people are guaranteed release, right? That's what the presumption of innocence says. That's what the US Constitution, the Illinois Constitution, that's what our laws supposedly already said. And they said that on paper in Illinois, but it wasn't what was happening in courtrooms, right? Because money bond was polluting that system. On paper, when a judge ordered someone to pay a money bond or ordered a money bond to be paid, that was often paid by that person's loved ones and not the person themselves, that was on paper a release decision. And from that point on, it was just about how much access to money someone had, whether or not they were actually released or they were detained. And so in a lot of ways, no one actually knew what was happening. Was ordering someone to pay $5,000 an intentional decision to try to keep that person in the jail? Or was it supposed to be, as it was on paper, a decision to release someone, but for the payment of that money? So we really feel like the Pretrial Fairness Act effectuates the law by having guaranteed release for the vast majority of people. Most people arrested in Illinois, like most people around the country, it's for lower level offenses anyway. People don't realize this often, that most people are being arrested for misdemeanors or lower level felonies, the sorts of charges where there's an accusation of harm or danger to someone else. Those are relatively rare in the overall number of arrests every year. And so part of what the Pretrial Fairness Act does is direct attention, resources, and conversations about pretrial detention to those cases, the cases in which there's an allegation of harm or a potential that's already happened or the potential of danger to someone else. And for everyone else who is going to be released, was supposed to be released under the old law and under the constitutional standards and the presumption of innocence, those people are being released more quickly and more clearly and without taking money from their grandma, their loved ones. People go to church with them to do that. So now we have intentional release or detention decisions. And if someone is detained, it's not because they don't have a certain amount of money, it's because the prosecutor requested it and they provided enough evidence to a court who made that intentional decision, justified it, and now it can be reviewed and everyone knows what's happening at the end of that hearing, whether or not a judge decided to release or detain someone. And there are a lot of other components, and if people want to learn more, the coalition's website is endmoneybond.org. And there's also information on pretrialfairness.org. I think we'll talk about specifics too as the panel continues.
And Charlene, if you wouldn't mind, can you just give us a snapshot of sort of like a bit of your involvement in engaging with this legislation and moving it forward?
Yes, good question. That makes sense. So the coalition panel, what's the context? So I'm trained as a lawyer and I've been doing policy advocacy. I got into policy advocacy really through the pretrial space, originally doing legal support as a volunteer with the National Lawyers Guild for Black Lives Matter organizers, and helped with other people in 2014 do fundraising for the family of Deshaun Pittman after he was murdered by Chicago police, about 2 weeks after Michael Brown was murdered in Ferguson. And through that process of legal support, we were introduced very quickly to the money bail system and its injustice, right? Chicago police attacked members of Deshaun's family and his friends at a vigil they held for him a few days after he was killed, and 8 people were arrested. 5 of them were charged with felonies. When they went through what was then Central Bond Court in Cook County, they were ordered to pay over $30,000 to secure their release, collectively. And through a series of fundraising efforts, crowdfunding online, raffles and fish fries in people's basements, a group of people, including loved ones of those arrested, law students, just people who've been organizers and activists for a long time, we were eventually able to raise that. We bonded out Deshaun's mother so that she could attend his funeral first. But it took us 4 months to raise the money to get the last person out. And the genesis of what became Chicago Community Bond Fund helped start and launch the Coalition to End Money Bond in 2016. And then later in 2019, a statewide version of that, the Illinois Network for Pretrial Justice, which Daryl and I are going to talk about, both the Coalition and Money Bond and the Illinois Network for Pretrial Justice. All of that came out of the experience of that community fundraising effort, the arbitrariness of the decisions that were made, the punishment that was being inflicted on people who were in the trauma of jail that we saw very directly and concretely. So I think that and there's a lot between, you can see, right? We're over 10 years into that original story, and about 8 years into working together as members of this coalition, still, even though the law has been in effect for over a year, still working together to protect the law, to continue to combat misinformation from opponents of the law, and to, I guess Daryl's going to keep talking about that because there's other elements of what the coalition is still doing. We could talk about it a long time because it's been going on so long.
Great. Thank you, Charlene. Raquel, we'll come to you and would love to hear about your work in New Jersey and the eventual passing of the Seabrooks, Washington Community-Led Crisis Response Act and sort of some of your involvement with it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, to the organizers of this incredible panel, and thank you for having me to speak a little bit about not just this law, but the work that so many of my colleagues who are on the call are doing every day on the ground. So, anytime I have an opportunity to talk about this law, I always feel compelled to speak first about who these two men were. Najee Seabrooks, Andrew Washington, while the work didn't exactly begin with their untimely and tragic passing, I think it's important to recognize that their loss and the tremendous grief and the pain of their loved ones was incredibly instrumental in really getting this law on the governor's desk, right? So we tell their stories first. We start the conversation with their stories first to respect and to honor their lives, as well as the courage and the tremendous sacrifice of their families and the communities. So I'll just say really quickly, and Dr. Jackson mentioned it, Najee Seabrooks, he was a 31-year-old father, a son, a friend. He was a crisis response worker in his beloved city of Paterson. He himself had been a victim of gun violence in the city. And after going through a tremendous ordeal coupled with abuse and mistreatment of the police subsequent to the actual shooting, he really dedicated his life to trying to be the change he wanted to see in the city of Paterson. He was a crisis response worker with the Paterson Healing Collective under the leadership of my colleague, Dr. Chowdhury, who's on the panel. On March 3rd, of 2023, Najee was in the throes of his own mental health crisis, his own mental health emergency. His comrades at Paterson Healing Collective, they were on site, they were prepared, they were willing to really help and offer him aid, having spent hours with him on the phone, trying to assure him that he was safe, he was loved, he had nothing to fear. The police eventually after refusing to allow his colleagues to engage Najee and assist him, despite their pleas, despite their willingness, despite their availability to do so, the police charged Najee's apartment and they fatally shot and they killed him. Just 5 months later, August 27th of the same year, under eerily similar circumstances, Andrew Washington, a 52-year-old man suffering with mental health crisis, was killed in his home in Jersey City by Jersey City police, despite his family calling a crisis hotline for help. Police officers charged his home. They were wearing helmets, they had shields, and after about 20 minutes, the police broke down the door, tased, and fatally shot Mr. Washington. Last month I had the pleasure to sit on a panel with one of his aunts, Miss Tony Irvin, and she reminded all of us, and I think sometimes we get so caught up in how these people, they pass away. She reminded us that Tony, he had a full life. He had friends, he had a family, that he, counted on him and that he counted on. He had gainful employment that he enjoyed and found purpose in, and he had so much more living to do. So I say all this to just, set the stage that, we're not just advocating for policies, through our work, through legislation like Seabrook's Washington Act, we honor the lives that have been lost, and hopefully we're working to ensure that no more are needlessly lost. So while the bill is historic, while the law is historic, it's also pretty straightforward. It allocates $12 million across 6 counties in the state to establish and operate community-led crisis response teams as an alternative to police for nonviolent substance use, mental health, and behavioral health calls. It is a pilot program, and it's established in 6 counties: Essex, Mercer, Passaic, Camden, Middlesex, and Hudson County. As of today, all but 1 county has been awarded $2 million, up to $2 million to establish their teams and to do the work. It's so important that we remember, though, that when we're talking about this bill, that the national trends in this country say that the majority of 911 calls are not even for criminal instances, right? That means it doesn't require someone with a badge and a gun to show up and respond to them. The majority of calls have to deal with houselessness, has to deal with domestic or familial disputes, has to deal with mental health or substance use calls. Really, basically anything that amounts to a societal inconvenience is what people are calling 911 for, and that's because they have no other alternative. So we know that in communities across the country, Black folks live in perpetual and legitimate fear of the police. Data shows that Black folks are 2.5 times more likely to be shot and killed by the police. In New Jersey, the data is even more troubling, and which is why this bill is so important, because we know that we lead with some of the worst racial disparities across the board, everything from health to wealth to education and incarceration. So establishing this bill, we are essentially supporting and resourcing alternatives that would otherwise leave Black folks in the state, brown folks, marginalized communities at perpetual risk of the police. Again, in New Jersey, I believe Black motorists are 130% more likely to experience use of force by a state police. Black residents, depending on where you are in the state, are 22 times more likely to face use of force by police. I think in Lakewood, it's 22 times more likely than white residents to face use of force, despite being less likely to have evidence of any crime and more likely to comply with police orders. They still face the most force. I think we know that the safest communities are not the most heavily policed, they're the most resourced. So in pushing for this bill, it really is the best way to keep our communities safe, and that's by reducing the police footprint and making sure that resources are really being allocated to what really amounts to a more holistic public safety ecosystem. So yeah, really, I'm the policy director with Salvation Social Justice. I had the distinct honor of helping to usher the bill forward and to really work with some of the state's best, advocates, several of whom are on this call. So it's an honor and a privilege again to be here with you all.
Thank you so much, Raquel, and such a great example of like reimagining what community safety can look like outside of the formal footprint to really make sure everybody is safe and in this holistic approach. So appreciate your overview of the legislation and sort of the history and what led up to that, and just humanizing the experiences of the 2 gentlemen that were killed by law enforcement. My next question is for Dr. Chowdhury. You already got a shout out from Raquel's piece, so. My next question is really for you. Can you share the importance of getting the Seabrook's Washington Community-Led Crisis Response Act passed from a community level and from a policy level? Love to hear your thoughts on that.
So first, I just want to honor our dear brother, Najee, because sometimes when we're on these panels, I'm on these panels or I have these discussions, he was a real live, he was like my little brother. And I sought him out to work with us because of his skill set, because of the joy he brought, his bright smile, and his love for his community. So I just want to give him the greatest honor because we were already doing this work, and this work already meant a lot to me. But after his passing, it just elevated the importance of why we do this and why crisis response and alternatives to policing are important in our communities. The work that I've done throughout my career has been to figure out ways that are community-led, that save the lives of young people, because I just don't want to see them die anymore because of the lack of investment. And why this was so important to be passed as legislation. As Raquel said, salvation and social justice, we're already in the works of doing the research and getting the conversation started around this bill. And so I was already, a part of their coalition of people that were talking about this. And then this tragedy happened, and I was like, we need to push this forward even, on 100 level. And can we get the bill named after him? Because in our city, if you followed the news at the time, we were lost, right? I was on the phone all day with my team, and I've always been an advocate, but I've never done this level of grassroots organizing where we had to get people riled up, right? Because nobody was listening to us. It could have been avoided. We haven't responded to gunshot victims, right? So I just want you to think about the level of tension and stress that's involved when that happens. It was nothing for us to be allowed to be let in to our colleague, our brother, our friend, who's asking for us to be in there just to be able to speak to him and de-escalate the situation. If any of us were, and I know my team, if they were there, they would just sat with him for hours, and talk to him and try to figure out how can we make him feel safe, so he would, we could get him the resources he needed. And we've done that plenty of times. This is not he just happened to be somebody that worked with us. We've done this in the community for now it's our 4th year of doing this work. So having a law passed because we couldn't see the justice in our own community, it was very frustrating, right? We were going to the council meetings. We were, protesting. We were using social media campaigns. We had several, requests that would be able to show the family of Najee, the Carter Seabrooks family. They lost somebody. The community lost somebody. We as a team lost somebody. My team is traumatized, right? I had 9 team members out there that were begging and pleading, and this will never be erased from their memories because they heard the gunshots that day. So nothing can atone for his life to be, lost in such a tragic and horrible way. But we wanted to keep his legacy going for his daughter, for his family. I'm so honored that to be working with his family, and I'm so honored to see like the dedication they had, right? They were, I just want you to think about, the first night it all happened, that night we were all in our office trying to figure out what do we do next. And I thank God for EJUSA, the New Jersey VIP Coalition, NCST, ACLU, Salvation and Social Justice, New Jersey Institute of Social Justice, Faith in New Jersey. I did the rallying call, and several of our violence intervention workers around the country that came through and heard our rallying call. And we were so heartbroken that it was hard for us to organize. They came in and offered their expertise and made sure that we could have some kind of action going, that this wasn't just his life, wasn't just something that somebody that lost his life in vain. And so this law, what it means is that there's a lasting, legacy of Najee's life. His memory will live on forever. And we can make sure that this doesn't ever happen again, that if Patterson Healing Collective gets called, right, or another one of our staff, or another one of our participants, we're going to be given the level of credibility and respect that we deserve that day. And we'll be allowed to come in, save a person's life, give them the resources they need, and make our community safer. So to me, that's what to me and our team, I believe, is what that law meant. And and I just want to think about their family, right? He has a daughter, and his legacy should be more than just losing his life to police violence. He did so much for his community, and we want to make sure that we honor that he wasn't just another person, right? That in the thousands of people that are getting killed daily due to police violence, he was also somebody, just like all of them, that was loved, cared for, and had something to offer the community, right? And that there was a great loss by losing him in such a tragic way.
Thank you, Dr. Chaudhary. Before I jump to the next question, I just want to give a moment for either Charlene or Daryl. Do you want to just speak a little bit about like the significance? I mean, we've sort of started to talk about this, but the significance of the Pretrial Fairness Act in terms of policy and at the community level?
You know, the thing is, we, as we work through this, one of the things that you come quick to is the importance of narrative. Who are the people being impacted? What are their stories? Connecting the narrative to the actual legislation. We accomplished many critical aspects. Of course, the elimination of money bond, but just as importantly, things like being engaged in the risk assessment tools that are being used, providing that it's not the sole basis for a pretrial incarceration. Authorize releases for law enforcement to let people go rather than bringing them to jail. Reducing penalties for various violations. Requiring reporting, that type of transparency so we know what's working and what's not working. Part of our huge struggle has always been getting to the data. So, I mean, there are elements of this that don't get talked about as much because obviously the important thing is people aren't going to jail. When we first started this process, there were somewhere near 12,000 people in Cook County Jail. Today, there are a few more than 5,000. So that in and of itself is a testament to the work we've been doing the last 8 years.
Great, thank you, Daryl. We'll keep jumping on next question. This one is gonna first come to you, Sarah. Can you talk, and actually, Daryl, your comment just now really queued us up for this. Can you talk a bit about how the New Jersey legislation helped to advance decarceration, and does the legislation help us move closer to other end goals like abolition?
Absolutely. Thank you for the chance to join this incredible panel. And it's really, like other folks have said too, an honor to be in conversation with you all and to continue working together. The Seabrooks-Washington bill and the effort to end cash bail in Illinois absolutely get towards decarceration, get us closer to the goals of abolition. And before I talk more specifically about, the policy itself, I'd love to just note that the process of developing the Seabrooks-Washington bill and the process of building and moving that bill in coalition, in community, I think itself was a transformative process for New Jersey. The partnerships and the alliances that were built between community leaders, between advocates who hadn't yet necessarily worked together closely, educating our legislature on the critical importance of this issue, all of that was transformative. And so I think that the process really does matter. And making sure, and Raquel and Salvation and Social Justice and Patterson Healing Collective and EJUSA and so many others really did try and succeed in keeping the goals and the leadership of folks who are actually doing violence interruption really at the fore, and making sure those leaders' voices were really influential in leading for us. And so just wanted to note that process matters, and how you do the work and how you pass the work and develop the bills really does matter. And so, when we're talking about decarcerative work, decarcerative policies, the ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union of New Jersey, thinks about decarceration in three structural ways. So we think about it as shutting down the entry points to criminal legal systems in the first place. So preventing folks from coming into contact with the criminal legal system. So this could look like Illinois ending cash bail. This could look like significant sentencing reform. It could end the criminalization of poverty through decriminalizing all drugs, decriminalizing sex work. Ultimately, the ACLU of New Jersey wants to shrink the number of people who are ever criminalized or in contact with the criminal legal system. Part of this work also, as Lisa and Raquel have already alluded to, includes limiting the scope of power for police and law enforcement. In our society, the role of law enforcement is incredibly outsized. And the scope of work is far beyond the expertise that police possess and are trained for. So we're seeing ongoing examples of police responding to people in mental and emotional crises and using deadly force across the country, but also in New Jersey. And so, we want to limit police power through ending qualified immunity and building and strengthening community safety responses that are grounded in other disciplines outside of law enforcement training. And so that really gets towards the Seabrooks Washington bill. I have a really fast story because I know that there's so much to cover, but Raquel and I were working on the legalization of cannabis years ago in New Jersey, and we were confronting the reality that youth, juveniles, often get over-policed when adult cannabis is legalized in a state. And so Raquel and I were knocking our heads against the wall saying, what's the alternative, right? And so I think a lot of the community response work that has emerged is in parallel to that question, right? Trying to answer that question of like, what else can be imagined that doesn't involve law enforcement as a response? I'm not saying that all of the work in New Jersey that's community-led crisis response is growing out of that conversation. No, just that it's the same question. And so to finally come to a more direct answer to this really excellent question is that, the way that I view the Seabrooks Washington bill is really part of the project of creating new and strengthening existing ways to invest in, support, and create community safety. It's a new envisioning. It's an alternative, but it's also an answer, right, to the reality that law enforcement response is not working. And there's deep racist violence that's happening, and there are better ways to create safety for community members and communities.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. I know, Charlotte, I might come to you real quickly. I know Daryl sort of already started to speak about like the clear decarceral effect of ending money bond. But if there's anything more you want to say about that, or the idea about how this the passing of this Pretrial Fairness Act might help move towards other goals like abolition.
Yeah, I mean, I just say quickly, the most important thing is that for our coalition, the goal is always to ensure that fewer people were jailed awaiting trial. And because you can eliminate money bond and not have that happen, right? The reality is that for some people, money bails away home and out, even while it was a sort of unchecked power to jail, in any case at any time, again, without even acknowledging that's what was happening. And so it was really important to design the law for the grassroots groups, working with policy advocates, working with legislators, to design it in a way that we felt could guarantee it would be decarceral and that fewer people would be going to jail afterwards. And luckily that's happening. About 25% fewer people in rural jails in particular. About, I think it's 18%, it might be a little less now, people in Cook County Jail just from a year ago, right? As Daryl said, we're over 50% fewer people in Cook County Jail over this 10-year period where there were local reforms before we changed state law. There were just changes in sort of structure through political pressure, court structure through political pressure. So there's a bunch of different tools that were pulled on. I will say one thing that's important for us, people who are free in the community awaiting trial are less likely to be convicted than people who are jailed. They receive shorter sentences. They're less likely to be sentenced to incarceration. So we really saw this partially as a way to prevent people from being sucked further into incarceration, being sentenced to prison longer. And I know we have short on time, so I think we'll wrap that up and move to the next one.
Great. Thanks, Charlene. I know,
And just
Sarah, there was one more point you wanted to make.
to say they're way
Oh, go
less
ahead.
likely to plea also.
Mm,
They're at home than if they're sitting in a jail cell.
great point. Great point. Thank you, Daryl. Sarah, was there one more thing you wanted to add?
Yes, I'm so sorry for losing this in my remarks, but the last piece of decarceration strategy for ACLU has been getting folks out, right? So we and our partners in New Jersey have passed a number of bills that have successfully decarcerated New Jersey's prison system by 25% in the last 10 years. And so, this included the passage of a bill called the Public Health Emergency Credit that Raquel and I have lost many years of our life fighting for, but it released 9,000 folks from New Jersey prison. So just wanted to round out my remarks there.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm glad that you highlighted that shining moment during a really dark time that was COVID, that a lot of people actually released during that period of time. Thanks to the great work of ACLU and Raquel and so many organizers. My next question is both for Daryl and Lisa, Dr. Chowdhury. So whoever wants to go first, can you talk a bit about how you fostered partnerships between community-based groups and policymakers? So there's already been a little bit of this sort of like process and how this came to be, but if you could more directly mention that from your perspective, that'd be helpful. So fostering partnerships, what did that look like?
I guess for us, we when we first launched our program as a violence intervention group in Patterson, it was brand new. Everything that we were doing was very different for everyone. So luckily we had the partnership with the hospital. So the hospital was kind of our social capital in the community. But it was very not readily accepted, right? Because you have a bunch of people from the community that are responding to gunshot victims, right, at the bedside. And then, this is something that, historically it's where the law enforcement has been kind of the stakeholder that has most of the power in that dynamic and the hospital. So here we are being introduced as, hey, you guys are going to go in and you're going to be the victim advocates and you're going to also be just as important in this conversation around how the care is for this survivor of violence and the next steps of after they're harmed. And so from the beginning, we've had to do a lot of coalition building. It started off locally with other organizations that believe in having an ecosystem of public safety. So partnering with BLM Patterson, having the hospital, other grassroots social justice organizations, reaching out to the ACLU so that we understood our rights, right? And we understood what protects us, because anytime you are a system disruptor, and that's kind of what I call our organization. We have to understand what protects us. We've been in situations where we've been threatened to be arrested for doing our job, and we had to know our rights, right? So we had to then also partner with other anti-violence coalitions, violence intervention coalitions, then talk to statewide organizations that do this work. I've had to reach out to the Health Alliance for Violence Intervention, which is the HAVI. They were, instrumental in helping us create policy with the hospital on how to make sure that patients' rights are being adhered to, right? Because we didn't know what was illegal, what was legal, what rights do patients even have, what rights do we have as intervention workers when we arrive at the bedside. And then in addition to that, it's much easier to do something that's different when you're in coalition, right? When you're with partners that know how to navigate the system. I was a juvenile probation officer for 10 years and an academic for 17 years. So my background has not been in policy making. It's been more teaching and then, being on the ground, working with people, right? And helping them change their mindset and stuff like that. So then going into this whole political arena and laws and trying to make this type of instrumental change locally and statewide. I've seen how important coalition building is and knowing people is. Social capital is everything in our work. I am so grateful to Salvation Social Justice, working with them. And because now they're also partners in this work with their Trenton Restorative Justice team in doing CBI work. With the ACLU, I always reached out to them because I needed to know, hey, are we okay? Are we doing things legally? Because I want to make sure that our team is never, doing anything that's not protected, right? And then working with I was a part of helping to helping to foster the relationships to build the New Jersey Violence Intervention and Prevention Coalition, which is a statewide coalition of partners that do this work. And we've been, instrumental in making sure that we were able to talk to policymakers. And I'm going to be honest, I am very appreciative of our local policymakers like Assemblywoman Shavonda Sumter and Benji Wimberly. They're champions of this type of work, and they've been great in having an opening ear. And and building those relationships with them, they've been champions of some of these legislations that have passed to help us, continue this work. When we first started this work, it was a pilot program. It was a $2 million grant. It was an open bid. Anybody could have applied, and it was in tandem with the hospital. Since then, because of the coalition building, the relationships we built, the relationships with policymakers, inviting them to see our work so they can see on the ground what we're doing, and then actually the hard data. Patterson's shooting rates have gone down by 33% because of the work that we've done. Statewide, we have some of the lowest gun violence rates around the country. You can't say that this is not because of the direct work that we're doing since 2020. During the pandemic, a lot of our programs launched. So because of that, and because of the coalition building, getting our narratives out there, getting our stories out there, working with policymakers that are champions of this work, and also being able to give them the data, the hard data. Hey, this is saving money, this is saving lives, right? This is the smart thing to do. And we will champion around you. If you need us to show up at the legislative hearings, we're there. We will bring people that are directly impacted there. And we will continue to fight with you because you fight for us. So I think that that's kind of the relationships I have seen from around this work and policy building that have been so instrumental, why we've been able to not just pass the recent Seabrooks Washington bill, but a lot of other bills that have helped to continue to sustain this work or create opportunities for this work to grow.
Thank you so much. It sounds like humanizing the experiences and the impact of these policies, but also having champions at different levels is really key to this work. Daryl, can you speak to fostering partnerships from the Illinois perspective?
Yes. So it's great that Charlene added to her introduction with a conversation about the Chicago Community Bond Fund. This group was incredible. I mean, after they did that initial work, they decided to make it a permanent effort. And in their first year, they posted over $300,000 and bailed out 45 people. And they continued to grow that particular effort. Of course, that was not a sustainable solution. When you have 10,000 people in jail, thousands of them on bonds of $2,000, $3,000, $1,000, that led directly to the creation of the Coalition and Money Bond. Now, the coalition ran into some challenges early on. While they had brought in various organizations, activist organizations around the area to focus on this particular effort, there were some problems, some personality problems, some history problems. And so they brought in Nehemiah Trinity Rising, which is a restorative practices organization that I was a part of at that time. Nehemiah had really been birthed out of the church here. Their early efforts were under the auspices of Trinity. So we kind of came in and did, peace circle work, one-on-one conversations that essentially lowered the temperature and brought that early group of organizations into a place where they could proceed with the work. One of the strong aspects of organizational practice, I would say, is that of consensus management. We have been very fortunate in our work to have incredible facilitators through this, 8-year period to keep us on track, to keep us focused, to keep the meetings regular and run efficiently, to make sure that every voice is heard. I would say that our early introduction to restorative practices has helped in that regard. Simply opening meetings with a temperature check, with check-ins and things like that, that now you folks are probably familiar with from meetings that you have, but 10 years ago or 8 years ago, that was not necessarily the practice. So these RJ practices infused into the work have been very helpful. As we have grown and added organizations, it has been encouraging, and this is really a personal story. The ACLU in Illinois came to us and wanted to be a part of the work that we were doing. There had been an earlier situation where a coalition of folks had been working on transparency issues within the Chicago Police Department, and the ACLU was part of that coalition. And then at some point, the ACLU had done a side deal, so to speak, and they became the sole arbiter or the sole access to this transparency, where all the rest of the coalition were left out. So when they decided that they wanted to become a part of the work that we were doing, I talked to Charlene and I just told her, I said, well, I have issues. I have outstanding issues with them that have not been resolved. And we actually set up a meeting with them. Charlene was there to kind of mediate. And we discussed what happened. I received the assurances that I needed to be comfortable bringing them into the fold. And they were, from that point, an outstanding partner, a valued partner. So just to say, that is the kind of way that we have managed growing our organization, but paying attention to everybody that has issues. I would also say we don't get stuck on who gets credit. Of course, there's a saying that victories have many mothers, but defeat is an orphan. And that if you can find all kinds of people out there taking credit for the Pretrial Fairness Act. They're everywhere. But we don't really worry ourselves about that. We just continue doing the work and making stuff happen. And then the last thing I would just mention, and it is not a small thing at all. We have been blessed with incredible talent. Charlene is an example of that talent, but there's lots of other folks that have filtered in and some filtered out over the course of these years. But that has been just a critical aspect of our success. And gaining that talent comes from being open to growing the organization and the coalition over the years. So I mean, that's what I will say to that for now.
Thanks, Daryl. Sounds like I heard a little bit of restorative practices there, I think, in the building of the coalition and sort of repairing some of the challenges of previous work. So great that you're modeling that. Okay, so we've heard, before I forget, for folks who are attending, if you are thinking of questions that you'd like to bring into the Q&A, you can feel free to write those in the Q&A function on Zoom. And I want to keep this conversation going. We've heard about the importance of process, about the importance of communication building, coalition building. And what I hear underneath a lot of this is sort of how you communicate with each other, both within these coalitions that are being built, and then broader communication to legislative making bodies, to maybe aspects of the criminal legal system, to other community groups, to people who have concerns. And so I think we'll put this question maybe first to you, Charlene, and then to Lisa, about how you think about these communication strategies with these various entities. And tips, especially as specific examples, are always great. And how you might have thought differently about communication for different groups.
Yeah, thank you. I think, Daryl, I'm really glad you talked about the internal communication. I mean, I cannot emphasize enough how important it was that we were meeting regularly in person. And we started working together before COVID. And to be honest, I think the change in how we meet, the frequency of using video, it's so convenient and helpful in so many ways, but there is no substitute for the relationship building and the relationships of trust that are necessary in a coalition. And because they will be tested when the opposition tries to offer you crumbs. They will be tested when, there's a miscommunication and it seems like disagreement or something, right? We need to be able to trust each other, and we need to be able to call each other or meet up and sit down and talk through things in the way that Daryl said. So I think that's the first thing internally, is just understanding the foundation of all of this, the foundation of organizing and where our strength comes from is that relationship. those relationships and that work. So not shortchanging that, which I think is tempting to do, especially when something comes up and there's the opportunity, right? We want to make people's lives better. We want to materially change things. We want to win policy changes, and we should be opportunistic and responsive and take advantage of those things. But we have to have that foundation in order to do that successfully and to stick with that and sort of stick the landing. Externally, I'll try to be quickly. I mean, I think one of the beauties of coalitions is that you have different messengers for different audiences. And you want to be consistent and you want to have the messages rooted in your values, but they can be slightly different or they can be framed differently. We really benefited from having so many faith leaders engaged. We had attorneys, we had community organizers, we had people who were formerly incarcerated, we had loved ones of people who are currently incarcerated. So there was just a huge mix of people speaking from different perspectives with the same overarching message. And we have from our different positions have different credibility and with different groups. So being able to really think about that intentionally was really important. I think doing it all, doing social media, doing traditional media, making our own media, telling our own story. I mean, there were a lot of artists who were engaged at different points in the campaign. We produced zines, we produced videos on our own, and we also went into sort of the hostile territory of TV news, reporting on crime and things like that. So I think knowing if a story is gonna, I think there are exceptions to this, but knowing if a story is gonna get written, it's better that our perspective is included than not most of the time. And the last thing I would say is we have really leaned into this in recent years, and I think it took us a little bit too long to own it fully, but we as advocates for abolition or social change or decarceration, we should own the public safety conversation, right? We should talk about how what we are doing when we push for policies and win policies and enact policies that lead to fewer arrests, lead to less incarceration, less prosecution, that those are positive for public safety, for community safety, and not let the other side own the safety narrative or the claims to be creating safety, because people are abolitionists and all of us want to live in safe communities. And it's very clear that just pouring as much money as possible into arresting, prosecuting, incarcerating people isn't producing the safety we all deserve, and that we know can be produced by investing in other places, and that the best way to help improve safety is to keep people in the community where they are able to actually start healing, contributing, stay connected to positive social influences, supportive resources, treatment resources, whatever it is that they need, right? And that putting people in the traumatic experience of jail or prison is only making it more likely that they are back there in the future. Right. So I think we should own that. I think that's nationally we've improved on that, but I think it took us several years into the campaign where we were like getting a lot more explicit about owning that. Because the other side doesn't deserve to control that conversation. They have not produced, based on the billions going to policing and prosecution and incarceration, they do not deserve to own the claim that their systems, their solutions are producing what we all deserve.
I love that. Thanks, Charlotte. Like, yes, to not shy away from the conversations about safety, and in fact, to center safety in these efforts, which are much more likely to produce safety. Dr. Chaudhry, can we come to you around your thinking or experiences around communication with various groups in the New Jersey process?
Sure. I agree with everything that Charlotte said. It's all about owning the narrative for us, because for so long we've had other people use media to criminalize and dehumanize our communities. So if you ever look on our Patterson Healing Collective page, you will see us doing the work. And I think that's so important. Like, one of the greatest things that we have is that we have relationships. So when we talk about local, county, state, national, there are different levels, right? Locally, our biggest cheerleaders are our local constituents, right? Those that we're servicing daily. And we need them to have a voice because we are not their saviors, right? They can save themselves. We're just there to support them. So a lot of the work that we do is around getting to the people that are the closest in proximity to the issues, and making sure that they have an opportunity and a stage and a platform to speak for themselves and what they need in their community, what they want, what are their needs, how can we, and what we do as an organization is make sure that we create that platform so that other people can hear, what they need and also what they're doing. Most of my staff consists of credible messengers, community activists that have been doing this work for a long time, survivors of violence, moms who have lost their children to gun violence, case managers that are from communities that are marginalized. So everybody in our team are somehow survivors of trauma, including myself. And I think that that's what makes our work so important and so sincere. And that's why the local buy-in has always been there. Because when we arrive to the bedside or we're showing up on that block, like as soon as somebody got shot, right? Or if the community feels more comfortable calling us during a crisis versus the police, we can guide them. We don't, right now we don't have a formal CRT team in place, but since we've launched our program, we gave the community a different option, which they didn't know they even had. Just an intermediary that helps them talk to law enforcement. Since we've launched, because of the relationships we built, every client that we've had, we've made sure that they can, take care of their legal, obstacles that they're facing, in the right way, because we've been able to communicate with them, right, and be that intermediary. So that relationship is everything, right? And because of that relationship and because of that, we got local buy-in from local probation departments, local judiciary, local parole departments, local schools, to think that we have people from our team that are survivors of gun violence leading as mentors in some of the schools that we work in, because they know that young people are facing these issues and they need people that they can talk to help them, make sure that we can prevent them from ever becoming gunshot victims. So on a local level, relationships are everything for us. We have to show up to the neighborhoods that need our resources, so that they can have the platform to ask and speak for themselves. Then on a county and state level, I think this is where, building with the policymakers, building with coalitions, because sometimes I'm going to be honest, as a nonprofit and a grantee of a lot of these funding sources, it's not always wise of me to, be politically engaged and talk about controversial topics because funding can be attached to it. I'm just going to be frank with you, right? So, this is why being a part of coalitions and having other coalitions that are, voices for these type of issues, having them run the campaign, right? And them coming to us as grassroots organizations on guidance on what we need, right? And this is how we can all work together. I think sometimes, we don't want the grassroots organizations to be doing everything, right? Like for me, our role is to stop violence and prevent violence. I don't also want to be the campaigner. I don't also want us to be out here changing laws, right? Because my team is tired, right? We show up to the legislative hearings and we've shown up to protests. But on top of that, we have to respond 24/7 when there's a gunshot victim. And then some of our staff members, unfortunately, are also victims of violence, right? And are still dealing with that transition and dealing with their friends or their cousins getting shot or something like that. And it's truly traumatic, the work that we do. So I think that in our work, I'm specifically talking about crisis response teams, violence interventionists, and how we communicate things. It has to be a team effort. It has to be, local, and then, based on the relationships we have built locally, and then also the partnership we built with coalitions and other organizations that have a much farther reach, and using their social capital to help us, move the things that we need to help sustain our programs.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chowdhury. I'm going to kick it to Sarah, who wanted to mention communicating with lawmakers in that perspective.
Thank you. And I'd welcome Raquel to jump in here with me because I know you do it all the time, every day, all day. But yeah, I think so much of what Dr. Chowdhury just shared about communication really does hold for communicating with lawmakers too, making sure that we're respecting and relying on trusted relationships and building new relationships, and balancing, right, what you mentioned, Dr. Chowdhury, about wanting to make sure that community leaders like yourself and your team are the voices that are being heard in the legislature, but also not wanting to burden your time, energy, and emotional, impact with constantly retelling stories that are deeply, deeply difficult. And so, yeah, it's for me as a policy person, it's a balance between making sure that I'm following impacted folks' leadership and making sure that accurate information is getting to lawmakers. In New Jersey, we're seeing an enormous retrenchment into tough on crime policy, which is absolutely not what most New Jerseyans and, in fact, most Americans want. So it's a mismatch in terms of what folks want to see and what lawmakers are really leaning towards and reaching for lack of maybe imagination or reliance on old racist policies. But I digress. But so, the way that we try to communicate about these policies are leading with stories, leading with, community leaders' voices, and trying to talk about data, numbers, research, information that can be verified, right? Things that you can point to, investigate, dig into, and understand.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm going to kick it to Raquel next to build off Sarah's perspectives, but also to talk about some lessons learned. So like deep breath, exhale, like after all of this process, just to talk about some of the lessons learned, challenges, the good, the bad, the ugly.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Jackson. And then, yes to everything Sarah said, everything Dr. Chowdhury said, Charlene. The only thing I would also add, as the flip side of it, is a lot of the way that we do our work, because we are a grassroots organization and we work, we largely follow the lead, and our advocacy is informed by directly impacted communities. An important way that we communicate to directly impacted folks on how they should communicate with lawmakers is to remind them that they, the directly impacted, are the experts on the subject, right? So when you speak to lawmakers, it's always important to approach it from that perspective. Respectful, yes, but less about going to them seeking the answers and more coming to them and saying, no, we know what our communities need. My experience has been is that largely lawmakers are receptive to that sort of approach. Also, oftentimes lawmakers are looking for cover, right? They are accountable to their constituents as well. So they are only going to do what they feel oftentimes is not only politically expedient, but also things that they feel they have buy-in from the larger public. So it's incredibly important to engage with lawmakers and to tell them what's of importance to you, and provide them with the data, with the qualitative data as well as the quantitative data to really support your position, because that is what's going to ultimately give a lot of these lawmakers, what I often say is the courage juice to really push the needle forward. So we always have to make sure that we're providing them with that kind of cover to do the right thing. With regards to some of the lessons into coalition building, I mean, I feel like a lot of this has been covered, but what I will offer as a, kind of just an additional point is anyone who has ever worked in a coalition or has been a part of a coalition, tasked with building a coalition, understands that it comes with its own unique set of challenges. It often consists of people who come to the table trying to advance or obtain a particular objective, but they may not always align in values or strategy. And historically, that has, to speak very frankly, has the potential to undermine the work or the effectiveness of the work. I feel incredibly fortunate and blessed to say, however, that in New Jersey, as it relates to the Seabrooks-Washington bill, that was not my experience. That was not my personal experience. I think we're very fortunate in that regard. And I think part of the reason why that is because we were able to secure this win, I think largely in the way that SNSJ, I'm not putting all of the credit because obviously this was a collaborative effort, but I think we started the way we wanted to finish. And the way we started is really rooted in how SNSJ approaches our work from the onset. And that is that largely it's rooted in our theory of change, which centers directly impacted communities. That means that all of the work starts with the public outcry, the lament, right? We give them a chance we let the voice of those who have been directly impacted be heard and really be central to how we move the work. You know, those voices are raw, they're real, incredibly troubling, at times the testimonies, but I think more than anything, it's not performative. So, you know, and that's really how we approach this effort. We did this, we started this work, although the bill wasn't really passed until, it wasn't signed into law until January of this year. This work started years ago. I would even say, around 2018, with the launch of what was called the Force Report by New Jersey Advanced Media. And what that was, it was like a 16-month investigation resulting in the state's most comprehensive database and first ever of police use of force. From this, we at SNSJ, we organized a series of public hearings in Black churches throughout the state, right? Where we heard these testimonies of people who have been victimized by the police. Then we held a series of visioning sessions, right? So see, what I'm illustrating here is this very organic and consistent coalition building, right, with the community at the center at all points. You know, we held a series of visioning sessions where we tasked the community with reimagining what public safety could look like in their own communities. And from those visioning sessions, ultimately came the recommendations that were needed to craft what would become the Seabrooks-Washington Act. You know, we were supported by faith leaders and directly impacted communities, ensuring that they were informed and aware at all points of the process. And they had direct access to the people who were advocating on their behalf, right? So we weren't doing this from the ivory tower. They were directly involved with everything. So we had communities at the center informing the policy, but at the same time, we're engaging and partnering with other champions and stakeholders like the ACLU, like Patterson Healing Collective, like New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, making sure that our talking points were tight, right? And this was incredibly important because we wanted to make sure not only that, you know, the right hand knew what the left hand was doing, but it made sense to make sure that everybody accomplished their goals. And that allowed us to identify areas of partnership where the bill could complement other bills that other partners were working on. So we didn't want this to be one-sided. It was really a symbiotic effort, mutually beneficial. So for example, when we ultimately, you know, we were able to attain assembly sponsorship. We had a really successful assembly hearing where the bill passed, but then there was a stalemate for a while and there wasn't much moving. And then we came right up on the lame duck session, and the ACLU and several of our other partners organized what was called the lame duck people's agenda, right? And what it did was it consisted of a list of police accountability policies that we were collectively working on. And it wasn't just the Seabrooks-Washington Act, it was CCRBs, it was transparency bills, it was the George Floyd choking bill, it was qualified immunity. All of that was on this document. And it was only, and the document was so important because it crafted a narrative. It showed a collective effort amongst those in the coalition about really trying to change the issue of police use of force in the state and the lack of accountability. And it was from that document that SNSJ was able to ultimately secure a Senate sponsor for this bill really at the 11th hour. It was Senator Beach out in Camden County who came across this document, and from there he saw the Seabrooks-Washington bill and decided to sign on as a sponsor and ultimately got this over to the finish line. So that's just an example, a small example of how the collective cooperation within this coalition helped to really move things along. And, you know, we ultimately found that, you know, when you're working in coalitions, it doesn't just consist of, you know, advocates or directly impacted communities. It also consists of lawmakers and department heads and agencies. So, you know, we occasionally found that there were differences in opinions. And I think sometimes misalignment in messaging, and that's when we had to really quickly nip that in the bud. Have some uncomfortable conversations sometime. You know, to the state's credit, there have been some real significant investments around alternatives to police. So many of our partners belong to things like a CBVI grant program, which is the community-based violence interruption. You have efforts around 988, which responds to substance use and suicide programming. And then there's also a co-responder model in the state. The challenge with that is that sometimes within coalitions, messages get conflated, right? And sometimes that can undermine the effort. So we had to really work within the partnerships to remind people, like, listen, yes, what you're doing is very important as part of the ecosystem, but it's not this. And that means that, we had to have some really candid conversations about occasionally co-opting language, making sure that we were very clear when we say community-led, exactly what we mean by community-led. Dr. Chowdhury talked about credible messengers. We're talking about people who are directly impacted, leading, operating, and are accountable to the work. We are not talking about a co-responder model, although some communities may find value in that process. So really making sure that we're having these candid conversations within the coalitions, and ultimately landing on the fact that all of this is important to the larger ecosystem of public health and public safety. And I think, we were really, really successful in accomplishing that.
Thank you so much, Raquel. I'm glad that you highlighted that point of not just coalition building with like everybody who like is on the same page and drinking the same Kool-Aid, so to speak, but also how do you engage people that come to this work in different perspectives, right? Or different motives, which is fine. So it sounds like there's this mutual respect, but also very clear boundaries, right? Of like what your mission is, what another organization's mission is, and coming together for a common goal. I think that's really important. And I'm glad you touched on that because that's an important piece that's often left out of these conversations. I would invite others to weigh in, maybe Sherilyn and Daryl from the Illinois perspective about some lessons learned in your coalition building process, sort of how you navigated people coming from different perspectives. I'm sure that happened in Illinois, so I'd love to hear about what that looked like for you all.
Yeah, I'm going to take just a little slight detour because Raquel hit on something that here at Trinity, I'm responsible for like 7 ministries and 3 issue teams. And the thing that I'm trying to do now is there's a concept of lament as power. It's a faith concept. It's something that I kind of learned through some of the seminary work that I did. And I am in the process now of kind of teaching my ministries that the testimony of the people is where we will draw our power to make change in community. And we have to be willing to go into the community and draw them out. So Raquel, I'm gonna be reaching out to you. I want to talk to you. Maybe you can help me out to get some of this thing going. The only lesson that I really would share is that as we bring organizations into coalition, we have to allow them to operate from within their strengths. Everybody can't do everything, and I think this may have been voiced in different ways. And I'll just share that as Trinity, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Trinity, but we're a big church, right? We were Obama's church here in Chicago. We got thousands and thousands of members, but of course, those thousands of members, there's probably 200 doing all of ministry work, right? But within the coalition, 2 things that I could really offer. One was a powerful platform that my pastor has, and his overall reputation as a liberation theologian and a man that looks at how are we going to help the least of these God's children. So that brings a powerful voice to the work that we did. The other thing is, out of these thousands of people, there was one instance where we went to the public defender at the time, and one of her assistants came out with, a box of like 3,000 petitions that have been signed by people in my church, and we sent them to her. So, these types of things are operating from within our strength. Everybody has that. And of course, the other thing is to allow these constituent organizations to grow into new skills. So if they're interested in working on something that they may not have the skills on, it's important to allow them to get in there and learn from the people that are more more mature in that particular activity. So I just wanted to put that in as lessons learned.
Thank you, Daryl. Thank you, Raquel. I've been writing down like nuggets of that I want to hold on to, and I'm on my third page. So thank you so much. Um, I want to at least bring one of the questions in that is from the Q&A, which is, and this can go to anyone. How do you see the recent election impacting this work, and what should the response be? I'm assuming that the writer of the question is talking about at the national level, the presidential election, but certainly there were lots of state and local elections as well. So how are you all thinking about that in these two states? Feel free to jump in.
I could offer a few thoughts first. I think other people might have more developed thoughts. I mean, first, I think we're both talking about state and local initiatives. Most criminal legal system reforms are state and local. So that's something that gives me comfort, right? That we have the ability to continue making progress at those levels. I think a couple other things. One, very concretely, federal funding. There's a lot of federal funding that comes through things like healthcare, things like Medicaid expansion. I mean, when we talk about needing to get people out of the jail and into community in order to receive like treatment, if they have a substance use disorder or they have mental health needs, a lot of if there's no Medicaid expansion, there's no insurance for a lot of people who are in that position. And just very simply, like, we need to maintain resources to pay therapists, social workers, caseworkers, the behavioral health services that people need. And so it's going to be very difficult for local and state governments if those resources go away, or the withholding of those resources is used to punish progressive or democratic controlled states, which is something that's been discussed. And secondly, I think we all know there's the concrete or the material like that, and then there's sort of the atmosphere or the vibes, right? And all of the horrible comments coming from the incoming administration about Chicago as a city, about people who are immigrants, about any targeted group, that it just makes the work so much harder, not because of anything that's materially changing, but because of the atmosphere that we're asking those local and state policymakers to make decisions in, because of the way that it whips up the right-wing elements of their constituencies and the media response, right? I think the level of credibility that's being given to baseless and hateful rhetoric, or increasing focus on media coverage of violence that lacks context. I don't want to say that violence shouldn't be covered in the media, because it does impact people. But we end up in a situation where people in the United States think that interpersonal violence, gun violence, is increasing at a time when it's been decreasing for decades, right? And we know there are blips and things go up and down, but when there's this kind of rhetoric and this kind of overall empowerment of the right-wing backlash to Black Lives Matter, that's what it is. Obviously, we should just be very clear about that. That when that rhetoric is picked up, when it's legitimized, when it's repeated, that makes things much harder, even when we're operating in a different level, like the state or the local, where our leadership hasn't changed.
Thanks, Charlene. Others, thoughts about moving forward, especially in context of the recent election?
I'll jump in. I think everything Charlene said, but also I would add, I think one takeaway is that there's going to have to really be a hyper focus on communities and local communities and local power. What is going to happen when and if those federal fundings go? We know that it's at risk, But then how do we secure leadership in these positions so that we can maintain the moral integrity of our communities and also sustain programming and its residents. So really, what does a hyper focus look like in terms of maintaining resources on a real community level? And then also increasing state and municipal investments in these community-led crisis response programs. I gave a quick shout out to the state in recent years because they have made some significant or notable strides in community-based investments. However, comparatively speaking to what law enforcement continues to get, it really is a drop in the bucket. So how do we support and resource programs on a local level to continue doing this work in the face of what we know is likely going to be less police accountability, less consent decrees coming out from the federal government and things like that. So how do we advance use of force legislation in the state that really protects residents beyond this administration? And then also we're seeing the intersectionality between police accountability work and what really amounts to civic engagement, right? How do we really turn out and mobilize around local elections, which we know state and local elections, to ensure that we have the leadership in place to really set up the safeguards to support programs like this, like bail reform, like community-led alternatives. So I think there's a couple of things going on at the same time, but really what it all comes back down to is really people power at the grassroots and local levels, because I think that's what's going to make the difference in everyone's day-to-day life.
I just wanted to absolutely agree and add to the people power point and just share that we're thinking a lot about the intersectionality of all these issues, right, with our partners in New Jersey and across the country, and thinking about the intersection of these systems, right, that impact so many people's lives, everybody's lives, of the immigration system that intersects with the criminal legal system, right, the issues facing folks who are being criminalized in their pregnancies. All of these issues are intersectional. And so working across, issues across communities, being in collaboration, coalition, and partnership across the fights, I think is what we're really thinking a lot about too.
Great, thanks, Sarah. We are winding down towards the end, so I'm wondering if I could ask you each to think about something. I'm hoping we can bounce around to each panelist, and Ashley, you as well, and maybe me as well. We've heard a lot today. I think a lot of inspiring discussion of these processes that really, in social work, a lot of times we talk about moving from case advocacy to cause advocacy, and just the way that in both processes you have centered issues of state violence that have really impacted specific individuals and specific communities, and how that lament, how that response to that has generated the kind of coalition building to make this kind of legislative change. So we're inspired. I also want to ask, for those that are tuning into this, and we'll be posting the recording too, so a lot of people will be watching this over time. I would love for you each to take just a brief moment to challenge us. Like, what is a challenge that you would give to folks who are watching this? Maybe they're practitioners, maybe they're interested in policy, maybe they're just an interested, community member and thinking about, like, what do I do? Because you all are so deeply committed to the work, I would really love to open up just a space for each person to give a brief challenge to those that are listening. Would anybody like to kick it off? All right, Dr. Chowdhury.
I think one of the things that all of us, I know for us at Reimagine Justice Passing Healing Collective, is capacity is always an issue, because we're always in the work and doing the work, and on top of doing the work, we also have to continue to grow the work and fight for the work and try to get money for the work. And so I think for anybody that's listening out there, I think one of the things that people that are really passionate about this, if you have the capacity and the skill set, jump into your local grassroots organizations that are really doing the work and help them, right? Help them build their infrastructure, help them. Right now, some of the things that, I never had to think about is like financial audits and all this stuff as you grow in this work and you're trying to get money from the government to help your community. There's so many things that you have to think about that I don't have a financial degree, right? My degree is a social science degree. And, now I've had to delve into all these other financial dynamics, learning about laws. So anybody that's listening that has a real passion for this, I think a lot of us that are doing this work, we're always doing this work. And sometimes we need people to help guide us and also take on some of the work. Sometimes what happens is people come and co-opt and they take away the power from us and then use our platform to build themselves up, right? We don't need that. We need you to continue to lift up our work, lift up our voices, but we do need people in the background that's gonna write those emails, help us set up some policies and guidelines, help us write a grant, help us do a social media campaign, help us take pictures for the social media campaigns, you know what I mean? Help us tell our narratives and our stories, help us write our stories, and put it in a bulletin, whatever it is that, helps this generation really get involved and engaged. I think that that's something that we always need. I know for us, because we're doing everything and it totally exhausts us. And I'll be honest, we are definitely, we definitely get tired. So I think that anybody that's listening that really wants to get involved, that's using your skill set and what you bring to the table to help other organizations that are on the ground doing the good work.
Raquel?
I would also add to that because Dr. Chowdhury, she really painted a very important picture, is that grassroots means oftentimes that the people who are doing the work are also filing the grants, who are also doing the reports. These are not legacy organizations. They are doing a tremendous amount of work under incredible strain and stress, and they're often doing it on a shoestring budget. So I think, it's important to not only lend your resources, but also call your lawmakers. Tell your lawmakers you want to see increased investments. Oftentimes people think, well, what is that going to do? They're not going to answer my call. These lawmakers respond to these calls. They respond to constituent pressure. Contact your lawmakers to tell them that you want your budget, the state's budget, to reflect the state's values. You say you believe in fairness, you say you believe in equity, you say you believe in justice for all of New Jersey residents, for all of Illinois residents, then we want you to literally put your money where your mouth is and make the investments into these programs. Also, I would say, while, state funding is important into the work, and many of our teams rely on state funding, there is value in diversifying, where you get your funds. So if anyone listening has access to private philanthropic entities who want to support the work, we also encourage you making those connections with the organizations who are doing the work on the ground, really diversifying where we get our funding from. And then also, if you're in a position to, become a regular donor to support the work, that goes a long way as well. And it really is a little goes a lot. So we encourage everyone to do that. I just want to remind people that, a lot of political campaigns are won and power shift by people giving $1, donating $1 a day. So we never want to underestimate what the collective people power can do and move in the work. So if it were anything, it would be that would call lawmakers, support the work with your own talents and resources, but then also helping organizations identify other means of funding and support.
I would say, since this is a panel about coalitions, something I got from Daryl and Nehemiah Trinity Rising and the early challenges of our coalition was we were asked, it was a provocation, do you have the luxury of not working together? To organizations who had history, who disagreed, who maybe there had been real mistreatment of each other in the past. And I think the other side is our opposition is united. They are recruiting. If we have damaged relationships, we need to work whenever we can to repair those. We need to work with partners we're not always in 100% alignment with, we're not in 100% agreement with. We need to identify where we can work together, and we need to be as powerful as we can be. So I think we need all of us.
Thanks, Charlene. I know I want to be respectful of the panelists' time and the attendees. Ashley, any final words? I just had one thought, but come to you first.
No, nothing super long. I'm just really impressed with this panel and really inspired. I've, like yourself, Matt, wrote a bunch of notes and we'll be following up with all of you to bounce around some ideas for further collaboration. Thank you so much for your time and just for really sharing your experience. I think it's important for folks to have like a real world example of like what alternatives to the criminal legal system can actually look like from a policy perspective, but also how that connects to grassroots community driven work too. So that's my final thought on this great panel.
Thanks, Ashley. I just want to echo thanks to everyone. I guess the only challenge I would give is, as somebody who lives in Illinois and has heard all of the very often crazy rhetoric about this bill, and we didn't get to it, but there has also been a lot of coalition building to fight to protect this bill and to actually implement it. And I'm guessing if it's not quite the same in New Jersey, there will be scrutiny on these kinds of bills. And so if a challenge I would give any of us is to really understand these bills and don't just believe the first things you hear about them, and to really fight to protect them and to ensure their success so that more of this can happen. So that's something I commit to. I want to learn about this New Jersey bill. And many thanks to all of you. Thanks to those of you who attended. And thank you so much for the work you do and for centering those that are most affected.